Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership at TEPSA. And each episode, I look to bring you a different guest who has encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another, and bring them on to share some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to share some of yours. I am so excited today to chat with Hedriech Nichols. Hedriech, thank you so much for being here. Tell everybody kind of who you are.
Hi there. I am, as you said, Hedriech Nichols, and I am a 6th and 7th grade technology teacher in an IB program in North Arlington. And I am also this year, just got the great news, also curriculum writer for middle school 6th and 7th grade. And I'm super excited about that.
That is awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And for anybody watching live, you'll know that me saying thank you, Hedriech, for doing this on a holiday. And for anybody listening later, we're recording this Memorial Day, but we're all pretty much still in quarantine everywhere anyway, so nobody's really traveling much right now. So I'm so glad you spared some time with me today. But Hedriech, I want to start from the beginning. So I love thinking about when we were kids. And so when you were a kid, what did you dream you wanted to be? Was educator even on that list?
Oh, absolutely. I was one of those kids who always liked to play teacher. Always enjoyed that. I think first I wanted to be a doctor, and then I got to 4th grade math and knew that was going to be a bust. And I always wanted to write, which I do. And teaching was something, even in high school, I was off campus a couple of periods every day to go and help be a TA at a local elementary school. The program was called, I think, Service and Exploration Education. And so I've always taught. At 12, I started teaching and doing workshops and teaching at my church. And so it's kind of always been that thing. And I remember talking to my mom, and I said, Mom, I'm going to be a master teacher. That's my thing. She said, oh, yeah, you're going to do music. And I did do music for a time, but I always taught. Always taught. So, yeah.
Now, did you know, were you kind of drawn to a particular age, or were you just wanting to work in education no matter what age?
You know what? I think my jam is middle school. That is where I've spent the bulk of my time. However, I have done really award-winning work with littles and done things with high school and college kids. I do adult coaching and adult education. So while I say, if you ask me what's your thing, really, if I had to choose, it would be middle school. But I love not having to choose. I love being able to do all of those things. Yeah.
I love that you say all that too, because, I think sometimes as educators, we can get caught in this mindset that we have to be one thing or the other. And I think you're a perfect proof of, no, you can love all different ages for all different reasons. For me, I love elementary kids, but I like working with all ages. My difference is I like working them in different amounts of time. Like I can work with elementary kids all day long. Middle school, give me them for an hour, 2 hours. I'm good. More than that, it's like, I need a younger kid now.
I get that. When I was pregnant, I was looking for a teacher to take over for middle school for maternity leave. And I was living in Switzerland. So that they have like real maternity leave, like months and stuff. So I was super excited. And I would call I knew all these musicians. And so I was teaching music at the time. So I'd call my friends and say, hey, listen, I'm about to go on maternity leave. You want to take over my classes? And they say, oh, awesome. What grade? And I'd say, 6th, 7th to 8th. And they go click. Yep. And it wasn't that bad, but it was like not middle school. So a lot of people, middle school is definitely a calling. I will say that. I do understand it. And yeah.
Now, have you always been drawn to the arts too? Like, were you always a musical person?
My favorite speech is, my mother was a musician, a church musician, and an artist, a songwriter. My grandmother was a musician, a church musician. My great-grandmother was a musician. Seriously, that's like, my son is a musician. If you want to follow Swiss Chris on bass on Facebook and on Instagram, I kind of sort of knew that one.
Yeah, it's a little bit in your blood, obviously. You weren't getting away from that one no matter how hard you tried.
Yeah. And it's funny. And my mom knew that I was going to do it professionally. And I started at 8 on the stage professionally. So yeah.
Now what's your instrument of choice?
Voice. Yeah.
And are you a certain style of music that you love to perform the most?
I am kind of like I am as an educator. I tend to be a generalist. As in Switzerland, where I spent the bulk of my adult music career, I say I was an American specialist because I really do a lot of I love jazz. Hi, Mohammed. I love jazz. I come from a gospel background, so I love that. I love doing classical. I got to do some Swiss folk music when I was there. I mean, I enjoyed, yeah, Swiss rap, Swiss hip hop. So yeah, I like doing music, period.
So what drew you to Switzerland? Like, how did you end up there?
Music. I was touring and it finally became more lucrative to live there and do music from there. The management company I was working with was out of Switzerland. So I ended up staying.
Now, I always love talking to anybody who spent time living in another country. And so when you were in Switzerland, what did you identify as the biggest difference between living in the States versus living in Switzerland?
I don't know if you know this about me. The thing that I would say, what as an educator, if you ask what my specialty is, it wouldn't be about grade level. It would be about advocating for equity. And I have this thing that it seems that I have this recurring theme, being a one Black friend. I was raised in Houston ISD. I know this is. I swear I'll get to your question.
Wait a minute. You were raised in Houston?
Yeah. Yeah.
I live in Brenham, Texas, right outside of Houston.
That is not right outside of Houston. That is where Bluebell is.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Okay. See, now I'm so connected to you. Like, just when the moment you say Texas, I'm like, oh, and Houston wrapped the rug. Goodness gracious. Okay. I'm sorry. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, I understand. And literally, when they stopped selling Bluebell for a while, I pretty much kind of stopped eating ice cream.
Yeah, me too.
Yep. So there's a picture. If you go to my Facebook page, you'll see a picture of me and the Bluebell guy delivering finally to the area.
Well,
Okay,
and I will say, my wife made the news when Bluebell got put back in stores because she went and lined up with my aunt like hours before the store opened, and were one of those weirdos that sat there, and when the door walked, they ran down to the ice cream thing and grabbed them. And so she is on camera like getting her ice cream. I was like, oh my gosh, Liz, the things we make the news for.
Yes. No, I understand that. So to get back to the Houston thing, though, so I was the first product of integrated school systems there. So I ended up being like a lot of people's one Black friend. Oh, wow. And the biggest thing that was different about about Switzerland, is that I was not like one Black friend at school, then I went home to like a Black community or any of that. There, if you wanted to count the Black people in my village, you would start with me and count one.
Wow.
So there's not a lot of diversity.
Now, when you talk about that, like being in a place like that, did you find yourself being uncomfortable or being treated differently because so many people were different from you and you didn't have a community to go back to?
You know what? Not really. It made me kind of sad because there I was an American, not a hyphen American. And here, like when my Black friends would come, they'd say, wow, man, there's like no community support. And I was like, I know, but these are not the white people with whom I have wounds. And that, the wounds of racism are American. They're uniquely American. And while there is racism everywhere, and I found that as I moved on, especially after I had my son, I saw some things that made me a little uncomfortable. But for the most part, if you read the stories of jazz artists who used to move to Europe to flee racism, it was very much a similar experience. You know what I mean? It was just, oh, wow. Oh, she's not only American, she's Black American. Ooh, and she's a musician. Ooh, how cool. So I got to be the cool kid.
I can totally see that, like you being like such a oddity that they're like, you're so much cooler to them because there isn't many people like them like that. So I can totally see that. Well, you mentioned something there that I love, though, is that you're very passionate about equity. And so for people who might be listening today, that can sometimes be a little bit buzzy, that word. And so tell me how you would define equity and why that is such an important part of who you are in your work.
I think that I want to change people's mindsets. We talk a lot about right now diversity trainings and equity trainings. Equity means you just level the playing field for everyone. And equity, those big words, those big concepts. But as a teacher, as an educator, that it's not about the big concept. Finally, it's about doing the very best for the person who is in front of you at any one given moment.
Right.
And that's kind of what I want people to begin to see, as opposed to approaching the issue of, capital V, issue of diversity and equity. Really approach the, is there something that this student brings out in me that makes me uncomfortable and
Right.
unable to do my very best for him or her? Is there something I should be doing to fill in gaps? I mean, we always talk about closing the gaps, closing the learning gaps. And that's what equity is all about. It's about, it doesn't matter actually if it's a color thing, if it's a race thing, if it's a religion thing. It's about doing the thing that you can to be the very best teacher for the student in front of you. And so I really would like us to approach it as a, like we say in education, chunk it. Don't do this big, huge thing. I want to have an equitable classroom. Okay, take a little bite.
Yeah. Well, you said so much goodness there. I love, first of all, that you said, it's about thinking about the kid that's in front of you. And, I think sometimes when we talk about equity or we talk about the importance of these issues, sometimes for some people that it can become very overwhelming very quickly. Absolutely. And so by you saying that, it just really clicks something in me, that focus on the kids in front of you. And oftentimes that means you as the educator, educating yourself over what makes them unique, what makes them special, and how you can grow to better reflect that, respect that, and use it within your own instruction. And so, you've worked with a lot of kids and adults over the years. And so for people who are looking to, better educate themselves over a myriad of issues, but especially dealing with equity, where do you recommend people begin?
Google. I mean, 10 years ago, there wasn't nearly the wealth, and 20 years ago. And there are a lot of educators who started 20 and 25 and 30 years ago. There wasn't nearly the wealth of information that there is now. I had what was it? I think November is Indigenous History Month. It's, and I had this question about the Twitter logo, which has a feather on it. And all Indigenous peoples don't have feathers. And I just thought, that's kind of cringy. My kids say that. My teenage kids say it's cringy. So I said, that's kind of cringy. Let me see. I really want to know, should I not use this? And I wanted to find out, but I don't know any Indigenous people. I don't know any tribal nations people here at all. So I'm on Twitter. I'm sure I can find somebody. And so I found someone. I said, I'm so sorry. I hope this isn't awful. And I just don't have anyone to ask. Would you mind being my person right now? And I simply said, is that cringy? And, that the way the story went out, she was fine. And she gave me a couple of people to follow. She told me where I can educate myself, get more resources for my kids. And it was a great thing. So if you have Twitter, if you have Facebook, if you have social media, and you feel like you're in a bubble, and you want to expand your own circle, then look and see on Facebook. I hope that there's some person of color in your circle. Right. If not, then maybe a friend of a friend's might have someone in their circle, or what side of town in your area is diverse. Find somebody at that school, Google their Twitter. Hey, Warriors. All right. Let me see who the Warrior tech teacher is, and send them an email, send them a quick DM, slide into their DM and let them know, hey, I am kind of at a crossroads in my journey. I want to be better for my kids. Can I ask you some questions? I know it's my responsibility to educate myself, but I would love to have some support on what I'm finding. If I have some questions, can you be that person? And not a lot of people are going to say no.
Yeah. Well, what I love the most about what you said there is you gave so many examples of how we don't have any excuses to not be educating ourselves and bettering ourselves, whether that is using social media, using Google, like all of this is at our fingertips. And so it kind of goes back to that mantra of when you know better, you do better. And so if we are asking our kids to learn every day as educators, much less human beings, we should be learning and growing. And sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, and sometimes it's going to make you really question what you've been raised with, but there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're continuing to have those conversations. So I love that you just kind of we're like, it's all there. Like there is no way unless you just flat out say, I just don't want to. Like that's the only thing you're left with now is saying, I just don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Oh, that you put things so beautifully. I love it.
Well, you're so active in so many circles and online and things like that. My question then is something I talk about quite often on Tell Your Story is the idea of doubt and comparison. And so how do you personally keep doubt at bay so that it doesn't stop you from being the best that you can be?
I think being from a time when there was not social media, when there was actually privacy and we grew up with, oh, don't compare yourselves with the Joneses. Keeping up with the Joneses is not the thing to do. My grandmama's thing was, don't follow the crowd will always steer you wrong. So those are the values I grew up with. So when I see people nobody's going to say, I just had an awful fight with my husband, I think we're going to go to therapy. No, they're going to show, look, honey, we're on vacation.
Yeah.
And I know that that is only one part of the story. So when I look at somebody's thing and said, gosh, oh, I should do more, or why didn't I think of that one? Or it's like, you thought of this, and this, and this. You're good. You are doing you're doing a great job, and you're doing the best. So I really just kind of have retrained my inner voice, and I've coupled that with not looking into someone else's backyard to see if their grass really is greener, because we all have brown patches. Every one of us does.
I love that. We all have brown patches in our yard. Ain't that the truth? Well, I'm also interested in when you look back on your life and all the things you've been through, the joys, the successes, the failure, the pain, all of that plays a part into who you are today. And so when you sit and reflect on the things you've been through, is there one that particularly stands out that you think that was pretty instrumental into creating the woman we see today?
Ooh, that's a
And I know
great.
there's probably lots of examples. So
No, that's a great question. I've had quite a journey. I think probably the loss, probably loss. I am relatively young to have neither parents nor siblings living, or I lost a husband at 30.
Oh, wow.
That kind of thing. So I remember going, I was in Switzerland, and I don't remember where, on a train, and I was sitting with two men who were in their 80s. And the three of us were talking about losing our spouses. And I remember getting off the train and just weeping because, gosh, these are my peers now. And it was just, woo. So I think just dealing with loss, dealing with moving, repatriation. I've been through some kinds of things, and I think those things make me sensitive to students and their needs, and the fact that it doesn't really matter what our social media is saying. Maybe there's something really really big going on. There are adverse childhood events, there are traumatic adult events, that we are all living life at sometimes a very clipped pace, and not necessarily on the sunny side of the street. So I think it's just being able to deal with loss, confront it, know that you will grieve, and know that you'll recover from that you won't ever stop missing the people who you've lost, or the way you felt when you were with them. You will never lose that, but it'll turn into a less of a knife in your heart, and kind of a dull, bittersweet ache, where you can also remember the good things. So I
You
think
said
that's
something
it.
really powerful there that I think, I feel like, there's so many of us that go through loss, and everybody's loss looks different, and happens at different points in our lives. But something that you said that I absolutely loved was that one thing to remember about loss is the pain doesn't go away. It changes, it morphs, like you said, it dulls. It's not quite as sharp, but it comes back in the most random moments, in the most random ways. And so, and we've talked about loss quite often on this series. I mean, this entire Tell Your Story series was started because of the loss of my mother a little over 3 years
Yeah.
ago. And so, my question for you then, as we begin to wrap up, is when you think about your own journey through grief and dealing with that in your own way, what have you learned about yourself through this process?
So many, many, many things. I think I think I'll go with what my mom said. This was before she died, and after I lost my husband. And I said, Mom, because I was at the crying it was months and months and months when I would cry myself to sleep every night. And I was functioning. I wasn't even depressed. I was just sad.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, Mom, how long is this going to go on? Because you may have noticed I'm kind of a sanguine person. So, used to being upbeat. And she said, baby, don't waste your time worrying about how long it takes. It takes as long as it takes. And there's a difference. As again, I paid attention. I wasn't depressed. I was sad, and there's a difference. I didn't have a hard time functioning.
Right.
I didn't have a hard time getting out of bed. There wasn't an overwhelming heaviness that I was dealing with, because those are signs that you need to look for help. That's if your sadness turns into a debilitating kind of a depression, then you want to reach out for help.
Right.
But if you're just sad and you're just crying at random times in embarrassing places sometimes, then, just get used to that being your normal for that space of time. And I think I have learned to cry in some really awkward times and places. So, yeah.
I love that. Well, as we begin to wrap up, my final question that I always love to ask my guests is, I believe there's so many things as people we hold close to our hearts and are who we are. And so for anybody who might be listening or watching today, if there was one thing that they walked away with, what would your one thing for them be?
Ooh. To educators, to everybody.
Anybody.
Okay. Same thing, I think. Do the very best that you can with what you have in any given moment. That's not going to always be the same level. A marathoner runs differently than somebody who's sprinting. Sometimes you're going to sprint. Sometimes you're going to be running a marathon, in which case your pace is going to be slower. That's okay. But do the very best you can at any given moment with what you have at that moment to give.
I love it. That was beautiful. Hedriech, I have loved this conversation so much today. And thank you for spending a few minutes with me on Tell Your Story.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I've been actually, kids deserve it for the longest time. And so it's funny, I did not realize you were here. And so thank you so much for asking me, for having me. It's a wonderful movement. Tell Your Story. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever you get it. It's there. I hope today's conversation with Hedriech has encouraged you to get out there and tell your story, because every story matters.